Zindagi Matters, where life meets hope. A mental health podcast by Swayam Foundation.
Hello and welcome to the show Zindagi Matters, and I'm your host Geeta Lal Sahai. In Zindagi Matters, we talk about mental health issues, we converse with carers, we record their experiences, we acknowledge their experiences, and of course the lived-in experiences too. And today we have, my guest today is Sharada Subramaniam, whose mother had Alzheimer's. Welcome to the show, Sharada ji.
Thank you very much, Geeta. It's my privilege to be here with you today.
Sharada ji, I remember that once you did tell me that your mother had Alzheimer's and you were the carer, you were the caregiver. So tell me from the beginning, like what happened and how did you think of consulting a neurologist and not a physician or anybody else?
Geeta, you're right. My mother was a patient of Alzheimer's, and quite like most other patients, it just kind of dawned upon us one day. This disease just creeps into your life. It doesn't come with any warning. So you start off thinking most of the symptoms are just plain old age symptoms, where people are getting forgetful. And it is only when things get a little more serious that you realize that there is a physiological or some kind of a medical problem that needs to be addressed. And by that time...
Just for a second, like you said, a serious problem. What do you mean by that? Seriousness mean like what did she do that prompted you to change your switch over to a doctor and go to a proper neurologist or to have a proper MRI checkup or something like that? Like what prompted you?
Luckily for me and for my family, Geeta, we had been reading about it because somehow at least we were aware that there is a disease like cognitive dementia or some kind of an Alzheimer's kind of a disease. President Ronald Reagan had been a very famous patient of it. So we had done some reading. And what really got me worried was when her normal forgetfulness became more chronic. She was forgetting her immediate incidents in her life. She was forgetting whether she had taken her meals or not. And my main concern was my mother lived alone. And she had been living alone for almost 15-20 years because my younger sister had moved to the US. So while I was around in the same city, I wasn't really in the same home with her. So when she started repeating things very frequently, when she started, buying things like she would buy a gold chain for my daughter and 2 days later come back with another chain saying it's her birthday and I've got her one more. So that is when I got a bit worried because she was handling money, she was handling credit cards, she was handling an entire home, she was running her home. So that is when I started getting worried. I said, if she has a problem which might impede her functioning, especially when it comes to handling money matters and, her own personal security and safety, then I've got to find out first whether this is indeed a medical condition and then whether we can somehow either arrest it or treat it and get her back to her normal life. Here, I think I must tell you a little more about my mother. She's been one who has always been she was one who was a very independent lady, highly educated. For her time, she was a postgraduate in English. She had done journalism. She was a teacher of English for many years in Delhi University, after which at a late age, she took up the legal profession and then made a good name for herself as a lawyer as well. So she had always been professionally active. She was one of the early women who drove on the streets of Delhi. She was always impeccably dressed, very careful about her attire, her makeup. So, she was not one to be ever sloppy or one to give up things. And more than that, she managed a fabulous home. She was a great cook. So to
Mm-hmm.
suddenly see someone who was so completely in charge and so completely in control, losing that degree of control uh,
Mm-hmm.
was was a bit scary. And when we saw the frequency with which the forgetfulness was coming up, that is when we realized to show her to a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I was in those days an officer with the government of India, and it so happened that just about the time I was beginning to suspect something is wrong with her, we got transferred to Delhi from Bangalore.
Mm-hmm.
So I did have no other, I had no other option but to shift my mother also with me. And I think the entire shift, the complete change of environment, a new home with staying with us, might have also contributed to some degree to her her kind of confusion in her mind. So I found incidents of her confusion, her forgetfulness actually increasing after we came back to Delhi. And so that is when I
क्या
started.
ये सही है, ये मतलब चेंज ऑफ प्लेस से शारदा ऐसा होता है? लाइक व्हाट आर यू
होता
सेइंग,
है
व्हाट यू आर सेइंग इज स्लाइटली लाइक that much of impact it gives.
काफी होता है गीता जी, because you know, she when you are familiar with a certain environment,
Hmm.
and when I say environment, I mean everything from the
Hmm.
furniture to the colors around you to the
Hmm.
smells of the house. I think all those things make an impact. And when
Hmm.
there are new things around, and from her reaction I could make out, because she immediately started saying, I want to go back home. She could
Hmm.
never accept that this was home. So
Hmm.
her home was the familiar surroundings that she had kind of in her mind she had created. So her daily lament would be that I'm not at home. So she would pick up pieces of her furniture. She was very physically strong, let me add. So she saw a small table that belonged to her from her home that I had brought in. Or if she
Hmm.
saw a vessel from her house, she would
Hmm.
immediately identify it and start packing it and say, I'm going back home tomorrow. So the truck is going to come and I'm going to get back home. So, you know, there was this constant feeling of not being in a familiar place and wanting to go to some other place which would look like home to her. I realized later, of course, that many Alzheimer patients display this kind of behavior even if they are not shifted out of their homes. But I somehow felt that for my mother, the physical movement out of her comfort zone did contribute to some extent to an increased agitation and an increased confusion in her mind.
तो अगर
So
उस
that
समय
was
आप
how.
वापस ले जाते हो उनको घर पे तो फिर?
पता नहीं, वो तो मैं सिर्फ कंजेक्चर में कह सकते हैं गीता जी, बिकॉज आई कुडंट अफोर्ड टू डू दैट. उनको
हम्म.
अकेले छोड़ने की हिम्मत नहीं थी.
हम्म.
और हम सब दिल्ली आ चुके थे. बैंगलोर
हम्म.
में मेरा कोई था नहीं, except
हम्म.
for her elderly sisters who are also, you know, who were
हम्म.
handling their own problems. So
हम्म.
I had no other option. And I
हम्म.
do not really know if had she gone back to her old house, whether she would have found it comfortable, because by then, you know, the disorientation starts growing.
हम्म.
I must say, to her credit, that
हम्म.
physically she remained very active till the
हम्म.
very last day.
हम्म.
And several of the very, very severe symptoms of Alzheimer's, she did not, or like I was fortunate that I did not have to deal with it. I think her general genetic makeup, her general healthy lifestyle, her activity through her years,
हम्म.
her, her ability to dabble with many things, her multitasking, all that must have probably contributed to somewhat lessen the burden on me. But at that point, I thought it was very difficult, because here was a mother who was, you know, completely in charge, somebody I was depending on all the time. And
हम्म.
suddenly the roles reversed. And
हम्म.
instead of her taking care of me, I had to take care of her. More than anything, it was not taking care as keeping her safe, you know, because this constant rush to go back home would
हम्म.
ensure that she would rush out of the door anytime it was open. And so she was kind of forgetful. She did not know the address. She could not remember phone numbers.
हम्म.
So one gets a little worried about their physical safety, most importantly. And
So how
therefore, I think
heartbreaking was it, Sharada, to know when the role reversal happened for you as a caregiver?
initially, Geeta ji, today, of course, it's been 4 years since she passed away. So maybe I can look at it with a far greater deal of a far greater impersonal manner. But at that time, it was extremely heartbreaking. It was very, very sad to see her, turn into this little baby. Uh, it was also, it kind of tested our patience. It called for a lot of patience on my part, which I must admit today I don't think I displayed it always. And I was glad I had a whole family with me who shared the role of caregiving with me, because it can be very, very tough, because it's a 24-hour care giving. It's not a question of, the physical aspects of looking after an elderly may not be there. She was to a large extent mobile. She was able to use her own, do her own ablutions and things like that. So those were not the concern. But the concern was that she would run off. The concern was that she might harm herself, or that she might fall down picking up these heavy things. She didn't realize that she was as old as she really was. So
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
she would sit on the floor. She would suddenly climb downstairs. She was doing physical activities which she had kind of almost stopped doing, before her Alzheimer's struck her, because she was already in her 80s, and she had, as long as her brain was normal, she knew that she had to kind of slow down. But the moment the forgetfulness came, she forgot her age. So she started, uh, jumping
Yeah,
around,
believing in a younger self.
living in her old younger self, lifting heavy furniture, which really shouldn't be done. So, these kind of problems that she might get hurt. So one had to be constantly on watch.
Mm.
And then there were behavior changes, of course. There was depression. She would sometimes uh, be sad and start crying. One wouldn't know why, and one wouldn't know how to reach out to her and tell her everything is all right. We would hug her or give her love, but sometimes it would overwhelm us. And then there were moments of anger. There were moments of confusion. There were moments where she couldn't comprehend what was happening. And gradually, of course, communication skills got bad. So she couldn't articulate much of what she wanted to say. So,
So when it
gradually,
started,
bit by
Shada, like I would like to know when she realized, or you people must have told her that you have Alzheimer's. What was the impact of the diagnosis on her? Like, how did she feel? Did she ask, "What stage am I in?" Or like, what anything? Did she become more depressed or something like that? What happened when she
mostly,
realized where she's standing then?
I think mostly it was, I think if I had to describe it in one word, it was denial. It wasn't easy for her to accept that she was forgetting, or that she had a condition where her brain was not kind of functioning, because here was a lady who had always prided herself on her, her mental abilities and her intellectual capabilities. So, to suddenly have to admit it. And I think that's a very common symptom, that if you are not able to accept that you are forgetting, that is a symptom that you are likely getting some kind of dementia. So, as long as you say, "Oh God, I'm forgetting," as long as you realize and you're conscious of the fact that you're forgetting something, you are still not in the phase of Alzheimer's. And that's what several doctors and experts have told me as well. So
Mm-hmm.
with her, as also with
This is a
Amma
new
also.
fact. I did not know about this. So this is a
Yes.
new
So,
revolution.
if any elderly person is saying, "Aajkal main bhool rahi hu zyada," you can
Mm-hmm.
rest assured that she is not an Alzheimer's patient, because as
Mm-hmm.
long as she's recognizing the fact that she or he is forgetting, you are still under that phase where your brain is functioning. As
Mm-hmm.
you grow older, the sheer volume of information that your brain holds, the sheer volume of experiences, there is bound to be a degree of forgetfulness. And I
Mm-hmm.
think you and I already realize it in our lives. I think
Mm-hmm.
our memories are no longer as fantastic as they were when we were younger. You
Mm-hmm.
forget numbers, you forget events, you do forget. And as long as you're conscious of the fact that you're forgetting,
Hmm.
uh, you are not a cause for concern. It is
Hmm.
when you become defiant, or when you
Hmm.
refuse to accept that you're forgetting. And
So this is
also,
an
I think
interesting
you're a little scared that you're forgetting also, because you
fact.
don't remember. You remember old events. You remember
Hmm.
your childhood. You
Hmm.
remember a lot of things in great detail of the
Hmm.
long past.
Hmm.
But the immediate present is where you are completely at a blank. So whether you had breakfast or not, that you have to get ready, that you have to have a bath, that you have to eat, or that you've got to chew in a particular manner, these are the things that you start forgetting. And that is why it is difficult to leave the elderly all by themselves, and it is so important. And I would advise all people who have elder parents or aging parents that once in a while do keep calling up, do keep visiting them, so that you can notice the behavioral changes early on. Because
Hmm.
if you can do that early, you can prevent. And if you can if people like us who already have a history of such cases in the family, you can reduce your chances of getting Alzheimer's by 30 to 40% if you just take up a better lifestyle and do a few precautions. So
When you
these are the
say
things
better
which I
lifestyle,
like to
what do
tell.
you mean by that? Like what
A
precautions?
better
Like,
lifestyle meaning, the first thing is, of course, that you've got to keep your brain active. So keep learning new things. Either learn a new language, learn
but
something
your
new
mother
on
was
some
doing all
new.
these things, Ashada.
She was, but I think to a large extent, hers was all, repetitive knowledge. There wasn't anything new that she was picking up. Most of it was, she was already so skillful at it. So whether it was cooking, or whether it was driving, or whether it was even her legal work, most of it was, by auto mode. So there wasn't any. So what they say is that you shouldn't be only doing the same thing. Learn a new language. If you learn a new language, or you learn to play a new instrument, or
Hmm.
you join a dance class,
Hmm.
something totally different where you have to exercise your brain to pick up some uh, new skills.
Hmm.
That is when you are challenging yourself. And of course, then there are puzzles like Sudoku and other things which you
Hmm.
can do. My
Hmm.
mother's biggest problem was that she had a heart condition, and I think it was the statins that she took, the medication, that caused her
Hmm.
problem. She was not really into the lifestyle issues.
Hmm.
Her lifestyle, as I told you, was fairly good.
Hmm.
But if you have a longer duration of taking statins because of heart problem, or if you have
Hmm.
psychiatric drugs, if you've had depression,
Hmm.
insomnia drugs, if you
Hmm.
don't sleep well, these are all things which can lead to Alzheimer's.
Hmm.
So these are the checkpoints, or the flash points that one has to flag and
And
be
what
careful
about
about.
the stigma? Like stigma is still so rampant in this, in any mental health issue. So,
Yes.
what do you think? Like when people came to know about your mother, did they stigmatize or did they label the family as such also?
Not really, Geeta. In fact, I think what was really good for us was that right from the beginning, I was very open about it. I decided I'm not going to attach a stigma to something which is an absolutely natural process. And that too, to a person like my mother, who had always been, so capable, and far superior to so many other women I had seen around me. Because in terms of her skills, her language abilities, she could speak better English than anybody. She could write well. She could, she was into social work. She was national president of the Women's Council of India. She was just into so many activities that I did not feel at any point. And I think the whole support system of the family was also there. We didn't ever try to stigmatize it. And probably to a great extent, I was also fortunate. We moved to Delhi, where people knew her only as she had aged. But because my mother, even with her Alzheimer's, was an extremely friendly and warm and smiling
Hmm.
kind of a person, so she kind of endeared herself. So I found a lot of my neighbors who didn't really know her earlier also had a great deal of affection for her.
Hmm.
And probably also the fact that we didn't hide anything. We never uh, tried to pretend that she was okay and everything was fine, and that we were dealing with it well. In fact, I was quite frank and open about the fact that I was getting frustrated, that it was depressing for us to see her like that it was a challenge to take care of her. And then that is when I kind of searched around and connected with the Alzheimer's and related diseases,
Hmm.
ARDSI,
Hmm.
which was a wonderful institute because they had a daycare center where I would send my mother.
Is it
And that
necessary to, like, for people to, like, people who are having Alzheimer's or dementia to go to daycare center, or can it be managed at home only by the family members? And what is the economics of the uh, managing a person living with Alzheimer's and dementia?
Let me be frank, Geeta, it's not cheap. You do need 24-hour vigil, so you would need an attendant all the time, because no matter how well intentioned you are, you can't be with these patients 24 hours. It is not just physically taxing, it's more of an emotional and mentally taxing to handle them, because you have to keep repeating the same thing. You've got to be very, very patient, and it sometimes can be very difficult, especially because most of these patients would be having children at that age. Like I was also at that age where my children were at busy ages in their schools. Our offices were also, our professional lives was extremely challenging. So we had enough stresses and other tensions, already in our lives. So to take on an additional 24-hour vigil of an elderly patient would have been very difficult had we not had support. So I'm really fortunate that my mother's pension and everything else took care of it. So I didn't have a financial liability on her, but it is financially expensive because you need to have maybe two attendants 24 hours. And even then I had to give my attendants a break. So I would take her, because I found that the daycare center helped because it gave her a sense of purpose. She felt like she was going to office. She would get dressed, she would wait for her taxi to come, and then she would go in the car with him. So she would feel that she was going to her office, she's going to go and do something else. So somewhere I think it gave her a sense of purpose, just getting dressed, going out, some car coming to receive her, going and spending time with a group of other people, playing a few games, doing a little bit of coloring. I think all those activities, because these are all activities, it's all very easy to say it, but when you're at home, it's very difficult to sit with an elderly family member and actually do it. So if you have a
What
set of
you're
professional.
recommending is, sorry to interrupt, what you're recommending is right now here is that there should be more daycare centers for dementia Alzheimer's
Definitely,
patients, because right now
definitely,
there are hardly, except ARDSI center at Okla, there is, I
absolutely.
don't think there is any other.
No, there isn't. And as you say, there is a lot of stigma. And I would just urge people, please don't take it as a stigma. The aging population is only going to increase. By the time we are in our 80s, we are going to have so many more such cases. And if we are going to stigmatize these cases, we will never be able to deal with it. And we will have, I mean, such a huge problem on on our heads. So we've got to be very natural about it. We've got to understand that it's a natural process. It's not because of some fault of the patient. It is something which can happen to anybody. Even the most active person can have it. One can't really say what causes it. And the second thing is, it needs to be managed with a lot of care and patience. And if the society does not come together, and if we do not have these kind of uh, common facilities like the daycare centers, we need many, many more of them, and we need many more people to be able to use them and to pay for them and to recognize them. Because a lot of people are now, I think, just locking up the patients and trying to deny the fact that they have these problems. And even government of India, in many ways, I can say it with great uh, knowledge, because I do know several people in the field. Even they take it as a mental disease. They do not realize that it is a geriatric problem, and that it should be part of the health and family welfare ministry. It should be given priority. Grants must be given. It's not a rich man's disease. A lot of poor people get it who are unable to afford. Treatment can be, as I told you, even if it doesn't involve treatment, care and management of this disease requires money.
How much can you, like, approximately how much does the finances come to? First question. And second thing that I wanted to point out was that you say it is related to age, but nowadays what is happening, younger people are also getting it, Shada.
Yes, you're right, Geeta. Younger people are getting it, and that's a cause of concern. It
Hmm.
is, and that can become even more difficult because then you're talking of livelihoods also getting lost,
Hmm.
especially if the person is the working member and earning member of the family.
Hmm.
Uh, in Mummy's Center itself, there was a young man in his 40s who
Hmm.
had a similar problem, and his children were having a lot of problems trying to handle this person. That is
Hmm.
why I say that while okay, it can be an elderly, I mean, it is
Hmm.
largely a geriatric problem, but
Hmm.
it cannot be ruled out that youngsters won't get it. And
Hmm.
secondly, we live in an age of pollution and all kinds of genetically modified foods that we are all eating. So most of us do not even know what can trigger these neurons in the brain and what causes these brain cells to die in this manner and what causes this disease. So while you can prevent it to an extent, you can't really be sure that you're not going to get it. And while there is enough and more care for other diseases like cancer and heart and all that, you have several institutions, several NGOs working. Somehow Alzheimer's has not had the same kind of recognition and hasn't had the kind of support it should get, because I think unless we do that, we do not ensure that the sunset years of our loved ones uh, pass with a great deal of peace and happiness. They
But why
can't,
do
we
you
may not.
think that not many organizations or not much support has been given to dementia Alzheimer's? Is it because people think that it only happens to old people, so and they are the spent
Yes,
force?
they are a spent force. There is no great care. There is no major. I mean, how much are you going to prevent? Somebody who is 85 may live another 2 years. Theek hai, let them suffer and go. They are not earning members. Most of them are in their last years. So you feel okay. So that feeling is definitely there. Secondly, a lot of the caregivers also don't really want to spend that kind of money or time. So they would also rather just ignore it and, somehow wish it away or lock them up in rooms and torture them or whatever. I don't know. I haven't heard myself of these cases. I'm just kind of assuming. So, obviously the elderly do not have priority in society. They are not the working members. They are not looked at as economically viable. They're not looked at as, citizens in the sense who contribute to nation building. They are all spent forces. They're already
How
kind
much
of,
is
they've
the
had
money that comes is invested in a month for a Alzheimer's or
for a patient. If I mean, I was paying almost 30,000 rupees for my attendance, and I mean, it was almost, you need at least 50 to 60,000 a month if you want to really give them a quality care in a big city.
and
Because
considering that most of the population is middle class, so that becomes a
middle
difficult
class,
task.
it becomes very difficult,
So,
and
what do
lower
you
class.
recommend? How should it be done? Like in comparison, uh, yeah, I do agree that in that abroad we have social security and all that kind of, but they have lot of concern for Alzheimer's and dementia, and they have care centers. But in India,
I
we are
think we
still
just have to.
lacking in that. So,
Yes,
what
you're
do
right.
you recommend?
I would recommend that a lot of the youngsters in this country who
Hmm.
want to do social work should spend more time with these patients, because they are not patients in the sense you're not going to catch any infection from them.
Hmm.
They're only waiting for some time and company, and
Hmm.
most of them are non-aggressive. Most of them are only forgetful. So if we could encourage college students, school students to, as part of their curriculum or as part of some uh, you know their s-
Hmm.
their pedagogy, if they could include some hours of spending with the elderly where they
Hmm.
can give some time.
Hmm.
A lot of that can help, because I think most caregivers love their parents and they're willing to spend the time and the effort, but the problem is only that they can't do it 24/7. So अगर आप उनको 10 2-3 घंटों का भी ब्रेक दे देना, it gives a lot of, it goes a long way in recharging them, because वो 2-4 घंटे अगर मुझे time मिलेगा, I'll take care of my other activities. If I have to be 24 hours, it's almost like taking care of a newborn baby. You can't
Hmm.
just leave it and walk off. No, you've got to be
Hmm.
around it. So
Hmm.
similarly, these people need someone to be around. You've got to kind
Hmm.
of keep an eye on them always. Even if
Hmm.
they're sitting quietly somewhere, you've got to ensure that they remain sitting there, they don't get agitated, or
Hmm.
something doesn't trigger, an agitation. So that is why we need to have care centers. We need to have some kind of community effort to take care of this, because unless caregivers are given that understanding, it's not
Hmm.
like it's not like a madness that runs in the, it's not like regular mental diseases. It's not a mental disease, first of all. It's a
Hmm.
geriatric disease, and so it is not something that runs in some families and will not run in other families. So
Hmm.
people have to understand that, firstly. Secondly, it requires compassion and time, not so much money, because the treatment per se is not expensive. The
Hmm.
medicines are not expensive. There isn't any great treatment. It's only
Hmm.
a question of managing them, spending time with them. And if you
Hmm.
need attendants to take care of them, yes, sometimes they can be expensive. But
Hmm.
other than that, it is not as expensive as any of the other diseases. So if you can just ensure that you have a compassionate community that
Hmm.
can come together to
Hmm.
spread this awareness and to spend time with them, and to somewhere help caregivers, so that caregivers are willing to spend time and effort, but they do need breaks occasionally. So if those breaks can come in form of some kind of community support, in terms of daycare centers, or if you have visiting attendants, like young college students or youngsters who are working, if any of them are willing to spend 2 hours, 3 hours, just to sit with an elderly patient and maybe play carom with them, or read a newspaper to them, or sing some songs with them, whatever, depending. For example, my mother would enjoy knitting. She enjoyed singing songs, and some of the old songs melodies, she remembered the words till the last day. So, it's not that they don't have a social life, but it's only a question of the caregiver, because he's so harassed and so, troubled by the day-to-day problems, and handling the mood and the aggression, occasional aggression, and the other issues. It may be easier for an outsider, an impersonal outsider, to spend those 3-4 hours to give a better quality of life to these people.
How many years did your mother could bear Alzheimer? Like,
My mother had it for almost 10 years, and she never really deteriorated too badly, because I think till the end, as I told you, even on the last day, she was singing, and she walked to her bedroom and passed away in her own home. So, but
she
I'm
was
told we
walking
were
till
very,
the last minute.
she was walking till the very last day. But I'm told that there can be the last few years can become very difficult when,
Hmm.
if they lose control of their physical body, where they are unable to eat, they are unable to do their normal activities. Then they require a lot of physical and emotional support, and
Like
that
most
can
of the
be.
people who I met, Sharada, they were like the caregivers. They did tell me that the family member and their loved one, I mean, he or she just was bedridden during the last stages.
Yeah, some of them do get bedridden towards the last stages. I was fortunate my mother didn't
Hmm.
reach that stage, but yes, towards the end she had calmed down. The
Hmm.
mood, aggression, and all comes down,
Hmm.
and they become more baby-like. So you when you lose them, it's
Hmm.
almost like losing a child. The trauma of losing the parent
Hmm.
uh, can hit you in both ways. So it was very difficult, because she was not just a mother, she was also, in a sense, a child to us
Hmm.
all. We were feeding
The
her,
reversal
taking care of
happened. Yeah.
her, dressing her, entertaining her, singing for her. So it does become more difficult. Uh, but I must admit that we as caregivers, at least I, because I have been through it, I'm willing to offer support and tell caregivers, don't be harsh on yourselves. We do get guilty, because we do sometimes lose our temper on them. They sometimes can be physically aggressive. They could scratch you. They could bite you. So you've got to kind of, it is difficult. You are having your own stresses and tensions
Did
of
you
your
also
life.
face this, like mother biting you?
Occasionally, yes. We did have to face some of those problems.
Hmm.
But you learn to, yes, you've got to be a little kind to yourself also. You
Hmm.
do aggressively sometimes react, but you've got to be kind to yourself and say that you are also going through, because it's both the caregiver and the patient who are going through trouble. The caregiver
Hmm.
can at least talk, the patient is unable to talk. So we've got to kind of understand that the patient needs far more compassion. And I think we should stop stigmatizing it, talk about it more, reach out for help. There is a lot of help around if you reach out, and I'm sure people will be willing to help. The problem is if we don't, if we kind of feel embarrassed or hesitant to talk about it, that is when society gets into trouble. And as we are getting into more and more nuclear families, smaller families, less children,
Hmm.
you're going to put the burden on your children. So
Hmm.
remember
Yeah,
that.
that's.
So we do need to have some kind of community approach.
Hmm.
And I'm so glad you're doing this podcast, because if that can also create awareness, it will do a great service to these patients.
Thank you, Sharada. Lovely talking to you, and so many insightful things you have said and told in the podcast. And I really think that we need compassionate society, and we need your idea of involving students is very good. I really appreciate that, and I do not know how to go about it, but I think society should be more engrossed into it, and we should have many more centers for it. I think so. Any other thing you would like to highlight?
Not really. Thank you, Geeta. In fact, I'm glad that you got me to speak, because I don't also generally, I like to talk and write about it more, because I feel that people should not, find it as a stigma or get worried
Yes.
about it. People should realize there is help, but also that all of us should be prepared. We are going in for a aging population,
Hmm.
and more, with families, children abroad, more and more empty nests. So
Hmm.
we have to learn to look after ourselves, and society has to learn to take care of every citizen of theirs, regardless of age. And
Yes.
these are all people who have done so much service to the nation, the elderly. If we can't give them an honorable and a loving sunset years in their lives, then I think we are really failing in our duty. We should ensure that they go happily and with a great deal of comfort when they leave this world.
Thank you. Lovely words. Thank you, Sharada. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Geeta. Thank you so much.
Zindagi Matters, where life meets hope. A mental health podcast by Swayam Foundation.